Okay, so it's been a bit of a while since I've done a video. Obviously, as you can tell, the set is now different. I have moved, and a lot happened since I've moved. I've been here a couple of weeks now. A lot of ups and downs. So it's been a very stressful time. So I wasn't able to do a World Cup final review of the Rugby Union World Cup. The Rugby League uh, Great Britain tour has basically been a disaster for Great Britain. They've lost every game. And questions will be asked of Wayne Bennett and should he have been made coach of the Great Britain Lions, and the amount of overseas born players who are also eligible to play for Australia and New Zealand and some of the Pacific Islands who are also being selected to play for the Great Britain Lions on that tour. Obviously, Sonny Bill Williams is the big rugby league, rugby union story because he switched codes for the second time. He's gone to the Toronto Wolfpack on a really big contract. And this is really interesting because Toronto are one of the few teams in European rugby league that, have money. Rugby league, both in Australia and and New Zealand and in Europe, the clubs are losing money. Lots of the clubs are barely breaking even. One or two make a profit. A lot of them are losing large sums of cash. So this is a big move. And will it work out for Sonny Bill Williams? He's later on in his career. He's been playing rugby union now for about 8 years. And it'll be interesting to see how he readapts to rugby league. He's an exceptionally talented athlete. The Magpies, yes, obviously Newcastle United. There's been multiple takeover bids since Mike Ashley 2 years ago put the club up for sale, and what we've seen is every bid seems to fall short. Now, I I don't know what's going on with Newcastle United. If I'm brutally honest, we know Mike Ashley is trying to sell the club for more than it's worth. I think we can safely say that the club is not worth what he's asking for. Every bid that's come in has come in at roughly the same amount of money, about £25 million short of what he would like. And it's interesting to note that this has been going on for 2.5 years. 2.5 years ago, he put the club up for sale. 2 years ago, the first bid by Amanda Staveley was put forward. Roll forward 2 years, Peter Kenyon's had his second bid. And again, we heard some really positive sounds coming out of Peter Kenyon's camp for the second time. We've had the Arab Sheikhs put in a bid. Peter Kenyon had a first bid as well. There's been a lot of interest about trying to get Newcastle United and buy it off Mike Ashley. But the bids seem to never materialise past, discussion point. But there's been a lot of positivity coming out. But at the same time, I think Newcastle United fans themselves are resigned to the fact that he's still going to be in charge by Christmas. It's one of those things. The VAR debate. We've seen a lot of debate about VAR in the English Premier League in recent weeks this season. The Sheffield United goal that should have been given that wasn't, a missed handball in the Liverpool Man City game, for example, and how in the European Euro 2020 qualifiers they're not using VAR. I think VAR itself is a sound system if it's appropriately and properly implemented. But what we are seeing is the interpretation of rules that have been written down for a long time and interpreted as such, being interpreted differently because of the video assistant referee. Plain and simple. We can safely say, I'm going to put the light on, I think. We can safely say that with how the offside rule, the handball rule, have been interpreted since the World Cup last year, that yes, I think the interpretation of certain rules has become blurred, and I think the implementation of VAR is not being as effective as it should be and could be. So there are definitely things that need to improve there. I think we can't go back and stop using technology. I will admit I think technology is the way forward, but they need to find a better way of using VAR. They need to find a way where the amount of time it takes from the video review to the actual decision is quicker. I think the fans in the stadium and the fans at home need to know more what's going on. I think the referees need to be fully mic'd up so the TV audience and the crowd at the stadium can hear, like rugby league and rugby union, where we know what the instructions from the referee are because they're mic'd up rather than closed mic, they're open mic'd. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at. I wouldn't say only use it for cup finals and big games because that's if we saw with the A-League Grand Final last year, just before the World Cup, the failure in that final of VAR. It failed. So I think in that respect, we have to be careful about what we wish for. We've seen it now in a major tournament at the World Cup. We've seen it at the Women's World Cup as well. Again, the debate, they did change some wording of rules. So from the Men's World Cup in 2018 to the Women's World Cup this summer, there were rule variations brought in. Interesting, they chose the women's format of the tournament to do that. And there was a lot of criticism that if they had done it with the men's, that the reaction would have been different from fans, the pundits, the media, all that. And I think the women's game was affected as a result. I think, but we've seen two different type of iterations of the ruling of the rule book used with VAR. But the debate is still there. There is a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of incorrect decisions this season so far that have had massive impact on games. And I think every game's a big game. Every game's a big game. Look where Liverpool are in the league. And Leicester and clubs like that doing really well. At the top end and clubs at the bottom end really struggling. VAR I think is here to stay. I just think they need to get it right, and they need to get the implementation right. And I think at the moment the FA and the various professional leagues that use it and the cup competitions that use it, they're not using it correctly. They're cherry picking games in the FA Cup in previous seasons, which I don't think has helped with getting the VAR to work better. We've seen it work reasonably well at both men and women's World Cups for the most part. There were some incidents where it didn't work. But you have to look at other sports that have a video review system. They regularly review what the video officials can look at. They regularly, after every season, review the previous season and look at where they can improve, what needs to improve, where they went wrong, what was working well. And if you look at rugby, it's in every top flight game. It's in every international. Rugby league, again, every top flight game, every international, and cup games as well. Ice hockey in the NHL, it's used in every game. There's a coach's challenge. There's various ways of having a video official work effectively. And I think football is the wealthiest sport, or soccer if you are from North America. It's the wealthiest sport in the world. It's got the most money. Yet it's lagging behind in the implementation of technology and updated rules for that technology. It's a very passionate sport, but other sports seem to do pretty well with the video assistant referees or TV match officials or whatever you want to call them, or the bunker or whatever the terminology is for that video assistant referee. They seem to have worked out quicker, fine-tuned the system quicker, and they've also not only have they fine-tuned it in a certain way, they've also had a long time of evolving the remit of that video review, that video official, that fourth official, that whatever the review is. They've worked out a way where they fine-tuned the system so it's far more efficient than it was, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even the season before. They still make errors. There are still errors that can be made. And I have seen errors in ice hockey, in rugby league, in rugby union, because it comes down to interpretation of the rules. Because in these sports, it comes down to the interpretation of the laws of the sport or the rules of the sport. Football, again, the interpretation of the rules that are written down has changed, and they have changed the wording of some rules, especially on offside and especially with handball. And that created a lot of problems at the Women's World Cup, which we didn't see at the Men's World Cup because the ruling and the wording of the ruling was different. But yes, I think VAR, they need to look at how it's been implemented. I think they have definitely missed a trick with it. I think they could have. Goal line tech has been around now for 5-6 years. They should have brought it in at the same time rather than do one without the other. We know that goal line tech works. The video review official, there's a lot of issues with it, and FIFA are obviously pushing this for international tournaments now. The domestic FAs are starting to push it as well in the top flight leagues, but they need to figure out a universal system from league to league, because the German league has a different VAR system with what they look at for VAR. The Italian have a different VAR system in the sense that the rules that they look at and the areas of remit. So there needs to be a universal system in place. Whether they only decide to use it for cup finals and big games, what do you class as a big game? Because a 6-point relegation battle between the two teams threatened by relegation is a big game for them. What is a big game? It's one of those questions. What do you class as a big game? For some clubs, every game is a big game because they're faced with relegation or a chase for cup competition places or whatever it may be. And other clubs are just a mid-table team that are just plodding along, and their only big game is their derby match against their nearest rivals. It's what do you class as a big game? That's an interesting point. Back onto the NHL. Some really interesting things have happened so far this season. We have seen some teams that were expected to do really, really well struggle. Minnesota and San Jose. The San Jose Sharks are having an abysmal start to the season, and the Minnesota Wild are not much better. And I will do a video on both teams. I'll get the whiteboard out. I'll get the whiteboard set up. Get the laptop stand out. Try and do things a little bit more interestingly with the setup, because obviously this flat is not as big as it looks. It's badly laid out, and we'll have a look at the numbers, because these teams were meant to be playoff teams, and a month into the season, it's quite clear that they're not going to be playoff teams. Quite literally, as they go and win almost every other game remaining. Their records are pretty shocking, and you have to look at the goals for and against and how things are going there. If we look back at football, Tottenham are not having the best start the season. Arsenal are in dire straits. Is Unai Emery's job at risk? That's another question and thing we can look at. Liverpool, I think, are looking very likely at this point to win the Premier League, but we said that last season and they lost out by a point. So the Christmas period next month is going to be really interesting, where the league is won and lost. Leicester, they have more points at this point this season than they did in their Premier League winning season. Do not count Leicester out if they keep up their good run of form. Although Liverpool have got that gap, don't count Leicester out. Man City, I think Man City, that group of players, I think, has peaks. They need a couple of additions, and they need to evolve their tactics somewhat. I think defensively they are frail, and I've been saying that for quite some time. But obviously they won with a record points haul a couple of seasons ago in the league, and they defended the title. But defensively they have been suspect for a while, and I think Vincent Kompany moving on and that leadership in the dressing room moving on has had an impact as he's gone to Anderlecht. The Balotelli situation with the racism, that's another one where he kicked the ball in the crowd. He's not the only player to react to racism. There was a Ukrainian league game where a similar incident happened. There is an issue. There is a massive issue, and we've heard a lot about racism in football in recent months. There seems to be a rise in it. It's carried on from fears of last summer's World Cup. It's carried on. It's not just an English problem or a British problem. It seems to be a European-wide problem with all the leagues and clubs in Europe. Some clubs seem to have a worse reputation than others, and some leagues seem to be worse than others. I don't know. The fines by UEFA are pitiful. Nicholas Bentner getting fined more in Euro 2012 for his Paddy Power boxes than the Bulgarian FA for what happened in Sofia last month. That tells you all you need to know about UEFA's stance on this. It really does tell you all you need to know about the stance of the governing body when it comes to dealing with this issue. It doesn't help that politics has become very fractured as well, and that's a different video for the other channel, really. But there has been a rise in these incidents, and UEFA's fines that they're handing out when a player is wearing sponsored boxer shorts and gets fined more for showing them than a whole stadium full of racist far right thugs and an FA in the Bulgarian FA in denial about it, and the Montenegrin FA as well. That says that the problem lies with the governing body and their stance and their action against the issue. Now, it doesn't have to be racism. It could be any issue. It could be just crowd violence. It could be, failure to meet safety standards. Any issue. The fines aren't big enough. It says to me that UEFA are more scared about, company contracts and sponsorship contracts than actually tackling a really serious social issue, and that's raised a lot of ire amongst a lot of people, not just here in the UK but across Europe, who are trying to combat this issue, and it doesn't help that the fines are so pitiful. Some of the fines dished out to some of the clubs for fan misbehaviour is less than what I earn in a year, and I'm on about £18,500 a year on my current salary. If you're fining a club less than that for some pretty vile behaviour by their supporters or issues within the ground or whatever, that says that that's wrong and it's not right. And the Bulgaria England match last month or month before sums up the problem. In the build up to the game, there were threats of racism. During the game, it was a barrage. It was constant. But the press build up, I don't think helped. I think it did put a spotlight on it, and UEFA's protocols. The protocols themselves, I don't think they actually really stopped the problem. I think it seemed to add fuel to the fire of these far right hooligans, and the fine that came out afterwards was pitiful. I'm not going to lie, absolutely pitiful. And this is not a new thing in Europe. This has been an ongoing issue for 40, 50 years. UEFA have shown, I wouldn't say a lack of willing, but their rules that are in place for what constitutes level of fine need to be completely rewritten and a couple of zeros put on the end because it's far too low. But we've seen in other sports crowd disorder as well becoming more prevalent. So it's not just a football problem where there's hooliganism and racism. There are other sports as well. The title race in Scotland, I think it's too early to say. I haven't been following it as closely this season as last season. Obviously, I've literally only just moved into my new flat a couple of weeks ago. I've just got internet today. I haven't really been following football or sport as much the last month or so. I've had some personal issues to deal with recently as well. Me and my partner broke up, so I haven't really had the time to look at the title race. But I understand that Celtic are not invincible. Rangers, Steven Gerrard's still there. He's obviously having an impact on that squad of players, a positive impact. I think last year showed with Kilmarnock and Hearts, and you throw Aberdeen into that mix, and a few other clubs, that the league was more competitive, and I think that's got to be the story going forward. Is keeping Scottish football more competitive, because the more competitive you can keep the club game, it will benefit the national side, which is clearly struggling right now. The Scottish national side is clearly struggling right now, and the best way to improve the quality of the national team is to improve the quality of the domestic league and the competitiveness of the domestic league. Now, if Kilmarnock had won the league title last season, that could have been the shot in the arm that Scottish football needed. Now, they finished third, but I think it has reawakened things in Scotland. I think clubs like Aberdeen and Kilmarnock and Hearts and Hibs and that kind of thing are more, and St Johnstone and things like that, are more competitive now than what they were, let's say, 10 years ago. I think, yes, Celtic have dominated the league because Rangers haven't been there. The money isn't in Scottish football, but if you can get that one club to win that piece of silverware, that one non-firm, old firm club, that Kilmarnock, that St Johnstone, that could trigger a new wave of competitiveness in the Scottish domestic game. Because look at the national side. It's not Steve Clarke's fault the team are that bad. He's inherited a group of players, or a talent pool of players that isn't good enough. Simple. And that's not just the the players based in Scotland. That's Scottish players across the board. The talent pool is not what it was 20 years ago. The domestic game doesn't have the money because of the collapse of Setanta Sport, the financial issues with Rangers and other clubs like Gretna going out of business. So the money in Scottish football isn't where it was. The quality level of Scottish football isn't where it was, and the development of players isn't where it was. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some good Scottish players, and that's not to say that if you are a St Johnstone or a Kilmarnock fan, you can't enjoy watching your team play. But you know it's going to be Rangers or Celtic for the title 9 times out of 10. I think Aberdeen are the last non-old firm club to win the title. So this is the problem, is the lack of competitiveness and the lack of change at the top. I think the difference you see in England to Scotland is, look at the amount of the old Division 1 and the Premier League. How many different title winners have won the old Division 1 or the Premier League? So we'll class the Premier League as Division 1, the top tier. We're talking double figures plus. Whereas if you look at the Scottish League, it's a handful of clubs. Now, yes, there are less clubs that play in Scotland than in England, but you look at it and you look at the percentage of teams that have won the title out of the whole 100% of clubs that compete in the league system, it's actually smaller than in the English system. And while there's been some historic Scottish cup winning teams, I mean, Aberdeen in the 80s were a brilliant side. Okay, they were a brilliant team in the 80s. So Aberdeen had a dominant spell. There are clubs in Scotland other than Rangers and Celtic that can win trophies. The issue is they don't win them enough. The issue is Celtic have had a free reign for a decade, pretty much a decade, not a whole decade, but they've basically been unchallenged for silverware. Rangers having all their financial problems has affected the rest of the league. I think, yes, Scottish football needs an injection of cash. It needs investment. If that comes from central government or local government with grassroots facilities, it needs to happen. They need to look at the TV deals in place as well. I don't know how many people want to watch Dunfermline playing Morton, for example, in the Scottish Cup, but I doubt it'd be more than 5,000 people on TV. But they have to look at not just the Old Firm or Hibs Hearts Derby or Aberdeen Motherwell. They need to look at, yes, you need a better TV deal. And yes, the losing team does get, the worst team gets rewarded for failure. I think they need to stop rewarding failure as well and reward success. That will probably drive teams to be better. You could look at the structuring of it. I think in England, though, there are more clubs, there are more fans there, there's more population. It's a more competitive league. It's not just one club winning all the time. I mean, Man United dominated the 90s. Let's not dispute that. Man United dominated the 90s and the 2000s. But they haven't been a dominant force for quite some time. Blackburn have won the Premier League once. Leicester have won the Premier League once. Man City have won it a few times now. Chelsea, Arsenal. 6 teams have won the Premier League title in my lifetime. In Scotland, it's 2. In my lifetime. Only 2 teams have won the league title in Scotland in my lifetime, whereas in England, I think it's 7 or 8. So you can see the difference in competitiveness in the top league. Now, yes, the Scottish Premier League is a smaller league for a number of clubs. I think it'd be better served if they combined it with the Scottish Championship and made that a bigger league. I also think if they combined Scotland's League 1 and League 2 together and had a second tier, that would also benefit Scottish football. I think there's too much familiarity between the clubs that play each other. I think that could be an option open to Scottish football. Or they play their season in the summer when the weather's better, because the winter in Scotland is far harsher and far worse with changeable conditions and matches being postponed than England, or the majority of England. Although the weather we've seen lately, a lot of flooding in England, not so much in Scotland. So it's an either or here, really. But I would say this, I think looking at Scottish, the TV deal, they have to market the whole league better, the whole product's better. It's more than Celtic and Rangers. We saw that last year, why it was more than Celtic and Rangers. Kilmarnock were top of the SPL at one point. So you have to market that there is other clubs out other than Celtic and Rangers to the international audience. The Scottish audience will know that. The Scottish fan base know that. But crowds are not what they could be at some stadiums. There's half-empty stadiums, apart from Celtic or Rangers or Hibs Hearts, Aberdeen. The stadiums have a lot of empty seats, which is a problem. And Scottish lack of success in Europe is an issue. I think the last Scottish team to get to a cup final was Rangers in 2008. So Scottish teams haven't had a good run in Europe for over a decade. So there needs to be some kind of investment from somewhere. There also needs to be, however, a reassessment of the TV deal, but also they have to look at the branding of Scottish football and the size of the SPL compared to the size of the English Premier League. They could probably sell more product if they combine the Scottish Championship and the Scottish Premiership together to make a bigger league, and then League Ones and League Two combine them together to make a good, strong second tier. Because familiarity breeds contempt. You play the same opposition too many times, and you got to try and sell Hibs Hearts like 4, 5, 6 times a season. You're going to get pretty bored of that. Even though it's a great rivalry, it will lose some of its intensity because you're playing each other every fifth week or something. It does lose a bit of intensity there. Could they switch the season to the summer? It's another option open to the SPFA. Oh, the SFA, sorry, and the SPFL. But again, these are open-ended questions. These are possible solutions to the problem. But at the same time, if you go south of the border, ticket prices are extortionately high. Replica kits, the price for merchandise, again, really expensive for what it's worth, for what it is, and how much it costs to make. They really mark it up. The TV deal, I can't afford to pay Sky or BT Sport. I cannot afford the subscription fee. It's far too prohibitive with my wages and my rent and my bills. So I'm stuck on Freeview. So I think there needs to be a bit of free-to-air TV of some league games as well. I think that could be a solution to the problem. But it's also how they work out the TV deals for Scottish football because of the collapse of Setanta a decade ago. That's left a financial hole that needs to be filled, and BT Sport are trying to fill it, and BT Sport are losing customers, which means they have to put their bills up. And it's a revolving cycle there. Sky, they're restructuring after being bought out by Comcast, so the next TV deal is due in 2 years' time. And that's going to be interesting to see how the structuring of pricing of the packages changes. So there's a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting debating points there, absolutely, no doubt. But I do think that they need to assess, who bids for the rights, what networks carry the games. Should more league games, not just in Scotland, but in England and Wales, also be on free-to-air TV? A lot of other countries have their domestic, top tier, at least some of the games on free-to-air TV. We know that there are still games unsold from this current TV deal that comes into effect in I think next season, I believe. Amazon now getting involved, which is not necessarily a good thing, by the way, for the TV packages or the media rights packages, as we now have to call it. But there's a lot of interesting debating point there. I mean, you've got Premier Sports, Free Sports. They're picking up leagues now. They've got the MLS, they've got the Portuguese league. I think they've got the Dutch or Belgian league at one point. So you are seeing that the monopoly that Sky and to a certain extent BT as well, the two big companies had 5 years ago, is not the monopoly now. We are seeing a shift by the various domestic leagues and various sports away from those two big players. And a lot of people have been very critical of BT's standard of production and quality levels and the price, and Sky as well. People are slowly switching off because they keep raising the subscriptions, which is an issue. And Premier Sports, Free Sport, that network, the Free Sports network, gets a lot of MLS games. They've got the Portuguese league on there. I think they've got the Dutch league or the Belgian league at one point. They've got some Serie A games. They've got some La Liga games now, I think. They put together a good package on the cheap. When I say on the cheap, they don't have the big stupid studio with all the presenters necessarily, but they do put together a good package of games. And I think it's worthwhile if you're on a budget, check them out. I think they're the fastest growing sports TV network in the UK. They're nicking customers from BT and Sky, and to a certain extent possibly Amazon as well. And Free Sports, it was a brilliant idea a couple of years ago. That's really hit off. It's really going really well. They got a good wide selection of sports and free sports, and I think they're picking up TV rights that Sky and BT have had in the past, and they've shunned. So you can get the Pro 14 rugby union, you can get some other bits and pieces on there that you used to get on Sky or BT, and they haven't renewed the rights, or they haven't decided to pick up the rights. And Premier Sports have come in and said, we'll have them on our network, and at a more competitive price. But yeah, I don't think just Scottish games. I think just football in general. I think rather than just the FA Cup being on the BBC and highlights, I think have some league games. Have the League Cup back on free to air TV like it used to be. I think where football especially has gone wrong is it's chased the money train, it's chased the money and the corporate greed too much. Now I get, you want to have investment and you want to have a good solid package because it is a business, but I think they've overchased the gravy train. They've chased the dollar, they've chased the pound, they've chased the euro. They're starting to price out their audience, and people are switching off, and they're finding other ways to watch games by streaming or illegally downloading, and they're finding other ways and other media outlets. Now Major League Baseball has a YouTube channel, so you can watch Major League Baseball games on YouTube. I think I don't think necessarily the 3 p.m. kickoff should be on TV on Saturdays. I think that's when the media blackout is, but I do think that they need to look at why kickoff times are being rearranged for TV. A lot of fans are not happy with that, but the leagues keep doing it, and it's not just a British problem. That is also a European problem as well. Fans are very unhappy when match day times are changed for TV. We've seen it in rugby league, we've seen it in rugby union, we've seen it in ice hockey, we've seen it in other team sports like basketball, baseball. We've seen start times adjusted for TV audience, and those that are the fans that are going to the game, public transport, they are very, 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 very frustrated with the fact that kickoff times are getting regularly altered for television, and that is frustrating. And that is frustrating if you're a fan. And a lot of what are the TV figures for these games as well? Like the lunchtime kickoff, the evening kickoff. What are the TV viewing figures? Because it's an interesting point of contention. If the viewing figures are really high, then fine, there's a reason why they've changed that game. But if they're actually not as high as they could be, why aggravate the paying customer? Because you're going to lose out there, I think. Do I think I can get to 1,000 subscribers by Christmas? Well, I've had to take a little break for a variety of reasons, both personal and, of course, I've moved. So I've taken a little break over the last month. So I didn't actually get to review the World Cup Rugby Union final, which is frustratingly annoying because I watched the game and it was brilliant. And it just was frustrating that I couldn't get a match review in that, and the third place playoff as well, the bronze medal match. I was a bit frustrated that I couldn't review the last couple of games of the Rugby Union World Cup. It's possible, absolutely possible. We've gained some subscribers, even though I haven't actually been posting videos for a little while. But I've had some health issues. I've had a relationship breakdown. I've had to move. So there's been a lot going on the last month and a bit that required my more immediate attention. But we're back. It's doable. It is doable. But we have to look at some of the things that are happening in sport right now, and we have to look at some of the issues that are affecting the various sports right now. And there are, as I say in football, a lot of managers under pressure. Unai Emery, I think, is a manager who may not be here by Christmas at Arsenal. I really do. Pochettino, there are still debates about his future. I think Unai Emery, I mean, if the form doesn't turn around, the Granit Xhaka situation and the stripping of the captaincy and the performances on the pitch, I mean, they're throwing away games from winning positions. And they're losing games they should win, or losing games they should draw, and drawing games they should win, and their form isn't great. But neither's Tottenham's. The North London clubs are actually having a real poor start to the season. Now, I know we're a couple of months in now. We're about 3 months in, but it seems just like yesterday that it was August and the season had kicked off. I think Emery is under a lot of pressure, but you got to look at successful clubs. Now, Arsenal have been so solid, as in consistent, for so long that, you know, Wenger, I mean, even when they weren't winning the league, they still managed to pick up 3 more FA Cups after their last league title. And they were solid for so long. They were so consistent. Now they've had some change. I think you've got to be careful what you wish for, because you could sack Emery and get worse, or you could stick with him and he gets you to another cup final. This is the thing. I don't think Arsenal have got a squad to win the league for another couple of years. They need to make a lot of additions to that squad. I think Liverpool, Leicester, Man City, they're all far superior. Chelsea, they've all got far superior squads, and actually have better managers as well. I actually believe that. I think they've all got trophy-laden managers, be it as players or as coaches, and they are far better than Arsenal right now. The top 4 at the moment, that top 4 will be the top 4 at the end of the season. In what order? If Leicester can keep up their run and Chelsea keep up their run, and Man City can bounce back from a couple of defeats, Liverpool may not run away with it. But if Liverpool can maintain their momentum, it could be an interesting one. But Leicester do have more points now than when they did win the league at this same point in the season. So it could get interesting, but the Christmas period will be what really decides the Premier League. If Liverpool can cut through that without maybe losing a game here or there, if they can get through that and drop, let's say, 3 points over the Christmas period as a maximum, then they are favourites to win the title this time. But they blew it last season. So I think Arsenal are not on the same level as the top 4. The top 4 are far ahead of Arsenal. Whether he's the right man to take the club forward, I think there needs to be an assessment of recruitment at Arsenal, of recruitment of players, and of scouting of players as well. And they need to look at how the team is put together. Tottenham, on the other hand, their lack of recruitment last season is starting to bite them now. I think these players have played a lot of football, gone to the World Cup, not had the club, the inward investment, as in they built the stadium, still can't win a trophy. I think they had a great opportunity in the FA Cup a couple of seasons ago in that semi-final against Man United. They were 1-0 up and they lost 2-1. I think that lack of buying players last season is hurting them now, because the players that were there last season, that squad has had to play a lot of games. They haven't had the rotation necessary to keep players reasonably fit and healthy. And a lot of their players are internationals as well. So those players have played a lot of football without getting the rest that they needed. Pochettino, there's been a lot of debate about his ongoing future. That's been going on since last season. Emery, it would be difficult, I think, for Pochettino to cross the North London divide. I really don't think he'll do that. I think he's got to, if he is going to go, he's going to go to a club that is got a history and can compete for trophies. What he's doing at Tottenham is, he's keeping them relevant, but unfortunately, the start of this season has been very, very poor. And much like Man United, I think they're not the team they were before. I think this Tottenham side have peaked. I think Arsenal need to look at their recruitment policy and where they're bringing players in from, and their development from youth and their scouting. Tottenham just need to invest more in players. I think they should have built the stadium after winning a trophy. I think they need to get some success before they built the stadium. I think that's where they've gone a bit wrong. They've spent massive on this stadium. Yes, they've got the NFL playing games there to recoup some of the cash, but was it really worth it? Could they have actually invested that money in the squad first to be able to compete for the Premier League, the FA Cup, the Champions League, or the Europa League, depending what cup competition they're in Europe, the League Cup? They need to win a trophy. And without that silverware, I think that does affect, them going forward. And what was if they get relegated? There you go. There's one for you. If they have a real shocking second half of the season, post-Christmas, and they're in a relegation battle, that stadium looks like a folly. Yeah, it'd be nice to see Leicester win the league again. I think, Brendan Rodgers, having been at Celtic then for that period of time, winning, all those trophies and getting that winning bug, has improved his confidence as a coach. I think Liverpool, it didn't work out, but Swansea, it did. So I think taking that on board, I think Leicester are a serious title contender. And every time they lose a player, like Mahrez, for example, they replace that player. They find a replacement. They've got good scouting. They've got good coaching. They've got a good transfer policy. Arsenal don't seem to have that. Will Emre be here by Christmas? I think is the question, not by the end of the season. I think the festive period could tell us, and the January transfer window. If he's still in charge at the start of the January transfer window, they're not going to sack him until the end of the season. If he's gone before then, they want to get a replacement in to then make some transfers to inject some life into the squad. But I think the squad he's got is just not good enough to take that next step. I think they have regressed. Absolutely. That humbling in the Europa League final tells you all you need to know. Absolutely. Really tells you all you need to know about where the squad's at. Yes, they got to a cup final, but they were battered in that cup final on the scoreboard, at least. And what do you say to that? I would say Morelos. Any of the clubs could sign him. I think he could slot in. I think it's his temperament. From what I read last season and the amount of times he was sent off and the amount of fouls he gives away, maybe he may not be a good Premier League signing. I don't know. Its temperament is, I think, where he's let down. Skill level, he's got it. The technical ability's there, the skill level's there, the fitness is there because he can run. I tell you, but the discipline is where he really struggles. We've seen it with Diego Costa. Okay, Diego Costa, a very physical forward, different style of centre forward, but discipline has cost his team when he gets sent off. So I think that's positive, but again, just because his discipline record has improved, he still has that temperament issue, and until he can go a whole season without getting sent off or costing his team with a silly foul, then we can make a judgment after a full season of not being sent off. He could still get sent off like 3 times this season. We saw it last year, big games, and cost Rangers dearly. So absolutely, he's obviously, Gerrard has had a word. They've obviously done stuff over the summer in the off season. They've obviously sat down and had that conversation that was definitely necessary to have. But at the same time, we're not even at Christmas yet. So until we get through a whole season with him, and if he can keep his temperament in big pressure situations and not rise to the opposition and react, then we can have a debate of whether, okay, he could suit a bigger league or a bigger club or whatever. I think Jermaine Defoe, yes. Jermaine Defoe has been sent off in his career, so he's not a saint. But I do think a player like Jermaine Defoe, that experience, the international experience as well as league experience, and then playing for some big clubs and then playing in some big games, absolutely, a player like that, mentoring a younger teammate is vital. I think that's why he was signed. I think they play a very similar style of game around the box. But I think a player like Jermaine Defoe in a squad of youngsters like Rangers have a very young squad compared to Celtic. I think Rangers' squad is younger, less experienced, less professional games. Having a player like Jermaine Defoe in that dressing room is vital. I think that's why the team have improved. That's why the Gerrard effects had effect. I think that's why they're more competitive. And there's still a ways to go to make this Rangers side better than Celtic long term, but absolutely, I think the seeds of growth are in place that need to be in place. This is something that I think Scottish football's been missing is getting some of these big name players who are near the end of their careers but can still have an impact, and getting them into Scottish football. But I haven't followed enough of the league this season. Obviously, moving and work and personal issues have had an effect on that. But having, over the last few years, watched so much sport and followed so much sport, I did get a bit of fatigue from it, and I did need a break anyway. But I think now that I'm settled in my new place, I think, yeah, absolutely, we can get some more videos back up and have more debates about, certain players this, certain players that. But absolutely, I think yeah, Jermaine Defoe has definitely had a positive impact, not just on just adjust. Yeah, that's better. Not just on Morelos, but I think on the Rangers squad as a whole. I think that's something that was lacking before. Was that senior player who can have a positive impact on the younger players around him and just general players around him. Uh, in a general sense, I think we'll see what happens long term, and if he can, and of course, if Morelos can, maintain this good discipline, that benefits the team. He's more influential on the pitch than off the pitch. I think you want your best goal scorer on the field than off the field. Gerrard's clearly having an impact on this team, and absolutely, I can see Rangers getting some silverware soon. Whether it's this season or not is another thing, but it's nice to see the Scottish League more competitive than it has been for the last decade. I think with the decline of Rangers at the beginning of the decade and now their resurgence and they're coming back up, I think that's Kilmarnock have filled that void. Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, and of course Celtic is the top gun. There are more teams that are now capable of scrapping over, the league now, rather than just one team winning by X amount of points, which has been Celtic for a long period of time. I think Aberdeen have had a bit of a down season last season and a bit of a down season this season. They had a slow start. I charted that slow start. I was a bit surprised by that, considering that they've been slowly chipping away at Celtic's lead over them over the seasons and improving. But I do think that, yes, Kilmarnock, especially last season, really did inject some new life north of the border. Yes, the Old Firm. So that's going to be an interesting game, and I think that's the type of game when you want to see if Morelos can keep his temperament. If he can keep his temperament in that and have a positive impact on the result, then I think he will probably get sent off again in his career. But I think it'd be less likely him reacting and having regular discipline problems. I think he is a young player. He's an exciting young player. I think at some point a bigger club in Europe, maybe not in England, but in Europe, will grab him at some point, and he might end up in the Premier League. He might end up in La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A, League One. He's going to end up at some point in a better European league, and wherever he ends up after that, who knows? Scotty Brown will wind everyone up. I think what is important is when you have a young player with a feisty temperament is to have a Defoe kind of player in that dressing room on the field next to him, kind of keeping him a level head. I think Rangers' weakness is the youth of their squad in general. They need a few more veteran players in there just to guide some of these young players around. But at the same time, you never know. I mean, they could have a blinder and upset Celtic. It's a final. If you can't get motivated for a cup final, you shouldn't be, or any final for that matter. You shouldn't be in professional sport. If you can't, get motivated for that, you shouldn't be participating. I think Rangers will have no fear in that sense. I think they are the underdogs. I think Celtic, their one weakness, they could be too complacent. But they've got Neil Lennon on the bench these days. Again, he's a feisty character. So we'll see what happens when it comes to the final whistle of that cup final in December. I think it'll be interesting to see what the result is and who comes out on top. But cup finals are unpredictable beasts, and in fact, knockout games in general, one-off cup games are generally unpredictable beasts. And I mean, crikey, we've already had the first round of the FA Cup, so it just shows how far into the season we actually have now got, is that we're at first round proper of the FA Cup now in England. So absolutely, I mean, cup games are very unpredictable. Some teams, especially a club from a higher league or a bigger club, had a bit of wobbly form, could be vulnerable. So it'll be interesting to see how both teams play in the season for next month going into that cup final and what the form book looks like, because Celtic have looked human. But we'll see. But no, I want to talk about some other sports as well. I think while it's really interesting, discussing Scottish football. We've discussed it a lot. There are other sports as well. I mean, as I say, Major League Baseball has got a YouTube channel. You can watch Major League Baseball on YouTube. So this is where I was talking about the TV rights. If streaming websites that are at least free to access at point of access, for example, with our membership options are there, then it does say that the TV companies need to look at their sales pitch and how much they're charging their customers for content. Major League Rugby in the US, they post all their games on YouTube as well. I mean, admittedly, their match reruns, but every single game is free and accessible on YouTube. So some leagues have, and some sports have decided to use the web, social media basically, to access a wider audience, and it seems to be paying off. So if professional football decides to go down this route, then I think that can only be a benefit to the sport, because we discussed the TV deal earlier. Fans are feeling priced out. Fans are getting frustrated with kickoff times being changed for TV, and that's the fans going to the game. And free to air, I think, still has a massive part to play in direction of accessibility of sport. I honestly believe that. We saw with the Cricket World Cup final. We've seen with the Women's Football World Cup. We've seen with the Men's Football World Cup. We've seen with the Rugby Union, the Rugby League, all these international tournaments. The TV figures when it's on free to air are higher than on subscription by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. It's a no-brainer. One more thing I want to touch on, which is related to football, the World Championship Athletics in Qatar and the half-empty stadium there. That does not bode well for the Football World Cup in 2022. Now, we know that the Football World Cup will be taking place at this time of year, and the World Championship Athletics took place a month and a half ago. But looking at how empty that stadium was for Dina Asher-Smith and things like that, that doesn't bode well. If the biggest names in athletics are drawing crowds like that in a stadium that isn't massive, that is a concern going into the Football World Cup, that the crowds will not be great in the early games, and they're going to have to try and discount tickets. The heat as well was a big, massive concern, even at night. The temperatures were far too hot for the athletes to comfortably compete at their best. So we're already seeing the issues that Qatar are going to have with the Football World Cup in 3 years' time. The issues are already there. And that's something I think I touched on in a video before I moved, was the half-empty Qatar stadium at the World Championships Athletics. That is a concern going forward if you are a football fan. And the TV companies that will be broadcasting the Football World Cup around the world will be looking at it going, that's going to be really, really shit look for TV. That's going to be a problem. So we'll have to see what ticket sales do for the World Cup when teams have qualified and all that in the next couple of years. Obviously, FIFA have admitted they're going to have to rearrange when the tournament takes place in 2022. But yeah, the World Championship Athletics did show some worrying signs that the crowds may not necessarily be as good as hoped. If so many people were staying away, or the temperatures were making it so hot to sit in that stadium, that's not a good thing. It wasn't a good look for TV. It actually looked really, really poor. And the criticism of the organisers and the IAAF were pretty damning about why they chose that location to have that World Championship Athletics. So a lot of debating points there, And of course, next summer is the Olympics in Tokyo. So they've just had the Rugby Union World Cup and had a really successful tournament. That's when location of tournaments. So Japan's got a lot of things going on, and Qatar will be obviously in a couple of years' time having the football. But the low crowds were terrible. And the press really went for the jugular against Lord Coe. Now, Seb Coe, British athlete of the 70s and 80s of legendary status, middle distance runner, many gold medals, many silver medals. He's a successful athlete in his own right, and a half decent politician, if you think so. But as a sports administrator, Yeah, while he was very good at bringing the Olympics to London, he's faced a lot of criticism in charge of the IAAF, which he's now, I think, the chairman of. Um, the criticism about selecting Qatar as a location for this World Championship Athletics tournament, has to rest on his shoulders. They've gone there for the corporate money rather than the actual, the right reason. They've gone for the money reasons rather than the sporting reasons. And I think that's a shame, and it just sums up with what FIFA did all those years ago, awarding the World Cup to Qatar as well. It is what it is, and it's modern sport, and I think that's where I think sports lost some of its joy for a lot of people, is the corporate side of it now. It's definitely had an impact on how people perceive professional sport, professional sports tournaments, and things like that. There's a definite perception thing. It didn't look great for TV when you're watching some of the world's greatest track and field athletes competing in a half-empty stadium. That really was embarrassing, and the criticism is rightly there. They've chased the money over the sport. So ticket pricing will be interesting as well. I wonder how much the tickets were going for, and I'd be interested to see how when the World Cup qualification process starts next year. At this time next year, when teams are booking their places, when they've booked their place on the plane to go to Qatar, what the ticket price is going to be, because that's been another thing that's been criticised in recent years. Criticism of UEFA for choosing Baku as a Europa League final destination. Baku will also be a Euro 2020 city. So again, UEFA facing some criticism of some of the locations they've chosen for venues in next year's Euros, which is a one-off, and then it will go back to a host nation or host nations. So there's a lot of debating point about where tournaments are held when it comes to international sporting events. Lewis Hamilton winning his 6th F1 title as well last weekend. However, new regulations come in next year, so will he win a record equaling 7th? That will be really interesting to see if he can do that. Not everyone is a fan of Lewis Hamilton. There are things that he does that are controversial. There's, he's not necessarily the most well-liked world champion, but you don't have to be well-liked to be a world champion. You just have to be good at what you do. But the regulations have definitely favoured Mercedes a lot in recent years. Of that, there is no doubt. There's no argument in the fact that Mercedes have really been favoured by the regulations as they currently stand, like Red Bull were with Sebastian Vettel in his period of dominance. Hopefully the regulations from next year onwards in F1 make people want to watch it again. But again, the TV rights package being on BT Sport and off free-to-air TV has not gone down well with a lot of sports fans. We've already lost MotoGP to BT Sport. We've lost the World Superbikes to Eurosport. So that's not on free-to-air TV anymore. British Superbikes as well. So a lot of these motorsport competitions have been lost to free-to-air. I think the only one that's left on free-to-air, apart from Formula E, is the British Touring Car Championship and support packages. And that was a brilliant championship this year from what I did watch. So again, TV rights up in the debate. It'd be interesting to see what other questions you guys have. I mean, I haven't watched as much sport, as I say, in the last couple of weeks because of obviously personal issues and moving. But I will say this. I was really impressed with the Rugby World Cup. The crowds were brilliant. Japan getting to the quarterfinals was brilliant. What is interesting is what's going to happen with Gregor Townsend at Scotland. I think they need to really look long and hard at themselves and why they failed to get out the group. I think Ireland need to look long and hard at themselves about why they failed in the quarterfinals so dismally. The French, for some reason, in the World Cups, they've become really competitive and they play some really good rugby at times, but at the same time, they also play some really bad rugby. There's a reason why they lost to Wales. Warren Gatland, his tenure as Wales coach is now ended. So Wayne Pivac is now in charge. And what direction do Wales take? England, how many of that World Cup final squad are there in the Six Nations? That's another debate to have. Italy, is Sergio Parisse going to come back for the Six Nations, and what's the future hold for them, as they had their best World Cup ever for performance? And of course, the South Africa game, that double tip tackle, that's not a nice sight. you could look at South Africa losing the first game, winning the Rugby Championship, and then going to win the World Cup, defying all the odds. And they fully deserved to win that World Cup. Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind they fully deserved it. They were the best team over the whole tournament. They grew into the tournament. They weren't just brute force. They did have a bit of skill to them as well. And their defense, that defense system they had, it did actually affect the All Blacks. Apart from Faf de Klerk making a mistake and putting them on the back foot, that actually they had the All Blacks under a lot of pressure. They targeted the fly half channel. They targeted the fullback channel, and the All Blacks were looking for an outball. And the All Blacks, obviously losing to England, no one was expecting that, but they were deservedly outplayed. And it's going to be interesting to see how all these teams move forward into the next 4-year cycle. There's a lot of young players coming through the ranks. There's some players coming to the end of their careers, like Dylan Hartley's retired this week. He's announced his retirement. A lot of players are retiring from rugby union and rugby league, and a lot of them are retiring not as old as you think. Sam Burgess has just retired from the NRL. He's had a lot of injuries in the last couple of seasons. And also some discipline issues as well. But he was basically he had shoulder surgery mid-season. And it was right in the off season, not long after the Great Britain Lions tour started. He announced his retirement, and that is a big loss to the South Sydney Rabbitohs, because they've lost one of the Burgess twins as well to Super League. So they've lost a bit of grunt in their forward pack and a bit of leadership in their forward pack. David Fifita has been the young Fifita, has been arrested in Bali. So again, NRL off season, more player misbehaviour. This seems to be a regular occurrence in the NRL with players misbehaving. So now it's one of the Fifitas, and he's a young player as well, and he's had a very very bright start to his career, but I think his first off season or second off season, he's arrested and charged with I think drunk and disorderly. I think it is more negative press for the NRL with player misbehaviour. The season's only been over about a month and a half, and players in the off season are already getting in trouble. It's not a good look. It is not a good look for the NRL with what happened last off season with Jack de Belin and Ben Barber. To have more negative press again after last year's off season being the most disruptive and destructive off season ever by NRL standards for player misbehaviour and other misbehaviours by club officials and things of that like. That's not a good look. I think the NRL needs to really find a way of addressing this issue proactively. They were very reactive beginning of this season. They need to be more proactive rather than reactive. They're reacting to issues constantly on the back foot, whereas if you're more proactive, you can stop these issues happening by having positive intervention. That's something they need to do. Absolutely. That's something that the NRL is not getting right, and the players themselves are not getting right. There seems to be a culture issue within rugby league, especially in Australia and New Zealand, although we've seen it in Super League as well with players misbehaving. We saw the Tompkins brothers last year, for example, getting up to no good in a pub. So there are issues at play here. It seems to be more rugby league than rugby union that has these problems, and it needs to be addressed. I think otherwise we're going to have another off season like last season. And is Todd Greenberg the right guy to lead the NRL forward for the next few years? Because under his watch, it has been a litany of scandal. Like the Cameron Smith diamond ring for his missus this season for his long service to the game. Cameron Smith is a record appearance and points holder. That rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. There was a lot of negative social media around that, negative press around that, and the NRL, the PR of the NRL isn't great at the moment. How it's represented, the PR teams of the NRL must be scratching their head, going, "Christ, what's going to happen next?" there was a lot of refereeing decisions that didn't go down well this season. The grand final, there was that refereeing decision. And as a Raiders fan, that is a bitter pill to swallow, but it's a thing. It's a hot topic, and a bad call like that has affected the outcome of the game. And we'll see what happens going forward with the NRL. But it's the off season, and it's already beset by scandal. And we're about a month into the off season, and a player's already in trouble. So that's something that needs to be addressed by the NRL in a proactive manner, and they're not doing it. NCAA ice hockey. I think, having watched some NCAA players come over here to the UK and play in the last couple of years in ice hockey, it's interesting. NCAA, I mean, it's a good level. The US, the US system is now producing some really good players that are going through into the NHL and other professional leagues around the world, especially in Europe. I think, yeah, there's some good quality ice hockey being played in the NCAA. There is. But it should possibly get a better media package. I've seen American football, college football. I've seen college basketball. If the NCAA could get a better media rights package, I think it could reach a wider audience and grow the game. I think that's something that ice hockey needs a more universal media rights package, or a better media rights package for outside the NHL. I think ice hockey North America, outside Canada, so the US, needs a better media rights deal. And Don Cherry's been sacked from Hockey Night in Canada for racial slurs against immigrants to Canada not wearing the poppy or whatever, or not understanding what the poppy means. So we'll get on to Don Cherry and him being fired by Rogers and Sportsnet, which is massive shockwaves, because Hockey Night in Canada and Coach's Corner is a staple of the NHL viewership. It's a staple program. It's been going a long time. There were rumours that Don Cherry had not had his contract renewed in the summer. So watch this space with Don Cherry and the aftermath, because Coach's Corner, some people love it, some people hate it. If you don't know who Don Cherry is, he's an ex-coach, an ex-player, and he's a hockey pundit, and he has his own little program with a fellow coach. They call it Coach's Corner. It's basically an old man wearing a crazy suit ranting. I think Don Cherry had ceased to be relevant about 5-10 years ago. I think they grandfathered him, but at the same time, there were rumours he was being let go this summer. He was kept on, and I think now Rogers Sportsnet possibly wish they got rid of him in the summer. Controversial. He does do a lot for the veterans. He's very supportive of the veterans' causes. He does wear his poppy with pride in Canada as a Commonwealth nation, but he did make some comments that, unfortunately, his employer went, "That's too controversial. That's one controversy too many. We're going to have to retire you." But he's in his 80s, and he's from an era where those views were acceptable 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They're not now. There's been a lot of debate about the poppy and on social media that I've seen in the last couple of weeks. It's getting a bit tiresome. But when a high-profile figure in sports media gets involved and says something, hello, Casey. Yes, it has been a while since I've been online. You did message me the other day. Yeah, I've recently moved, and I've had some personal issues to deal with over the last month or so. So that's actually taken up a lot of my time and a lot of my attention. But I thought I'd do a live stream this afternoon. There's a lot to catch up on and talk about, and there's some big sports stories that are happening, obviously, right now, which we can always check up on. I mean, the Don Cherry one in the ice hockey, that is, for me, actually a really big story because they're obviously, as I say, oh, yeah, God. I haven't watched a Bracknell Bees game in about a month and a half, because moving. I haven't been able to. But at the same time, consistency has been an issue this season. They have been misfiring. They've won some games, lost some games. But But because I haven't actually been to a game for a little while, I can't, comment on how the team are doing. But results like that aren't a good look. To be fair, they don't look good. But loss of form happens for every team. Every team wins some and lose some. I mean, they've beaten the best team in the league. They've lost the worst team in the league. So there's it's an interesting one. Yes, the Elite League. Obviously, with the success, let's just say, the success of the Great British team at the World Championships by staying in the top tier, winning games, being competitive. Yes, I think it would. The sport is definitely growing, and as I say, Hull Pirates want to, make that jump. I would think Peterborough and Bracknell, I think, have the facilities in place to make the jump as well. There have been rumours of the KHL wanting to have a London-based team. That's nothing new. The NHL, obviously, 10, 20 years ago, had plans to have a European franchise or a European league. But honestly, I'm not sure the KHL going to London is actually going to work, because what we've seen is there are several teams in the London area, Greater London area, that play ice hockey in this country. They don't draw a lot of fans, and there is no real centralised fan base in London. London's a very cosmopolitan, big metropolitan area, very cosmopolitan, very worldly city. But I can't see it working. But the KHL could be taking an overseas game there. We know the NHL are taking games to Europe. If the KHL were to take a regular season game overseas, yeah. We saw the Great Britain national side play against the KHL team in the warm-up for the World Championships. That makes sense, taking a game on the road. The NHL do that very, very well with their global series. Very well. But I can't see how a London team at this current time would actually work. I can't see a unified fan base in Greater London, because you have so many teams in Greater London that play. And you've got to get an arena ready. And the only arena ready that I can think of where you could put an ice surface and actually have a permanent home would be the O2. But that means you have to look at the layout inside of the O2 and make a lot of adjustments and seating to get the arena in there. So I think you would need a purpose-built, I would say 10,000 seater arena minimum, maybe 15,000. Find a place to put that, put an ice surface in, and go from there. You have to figure something out. I do think I don't think it works, because we've got an established league. We've seen the KHL go to outside Russia, to the Czech Republic and Latvia and Finland. Finland, Jokerit, it works. It does sort of work, because the quality level of the Finns, that they won the World Championship, the quality level of the Finns is plain for all to see. They have got one of the world's best international ice hockey teams. They've got world-class players. Latvia, I think there's still Dinamo Riga. Prague went back to the Czech league. So it hasn't all worked out well necessarily for the KHL in Eastern Europe. They've not put a team in Germany. They've not put a team in Sweden. They could put a team in Switzerland as well. They haven't. So for them looking at London, it's an interesting one with the distance from Russia, the currency difference, the time zone difference, I think. And yeah, you have to be very, very careful in a sense that the Elite League is a predominantly North English based league with a couple of Scottish teams, and Guildford and Cardiff and Belfast. It's predominantly played in the North Midlands of England, with the majority of the teams being there. So yes, in that respect, having a big London team would be a good thing for the Elite League, but I don't know how it benefits the KHL, because it'll be a team with no rivals. This is why I don't know why it works. For some reason, it works for Dynamo Riga and it works for Jokerit playing in the KHL, but really, it doesn't make much sense. You're just plonking a team there with a load of Russian players in it, with some local talent. I don't know. I don't see how it would work. There's not enough. I don't think the quality level of the British player is at the KHL season, regular season, going the whole season through to the end, then the playoffs, is good enough at this time. The Elite League is perfect for the development pathway that the players we have, and the more talented players are starting to go abroad, like O'Connor, Kirk. I think a few others are being tipped to get possibly going, and a future NHL draft will be picked up by various leagues in Europe. I don't think having a KHL team in the UK is necessarily the right idea. It might work for the KHL, but I'm not sure if you're going to get the fans on board. I'm not even sure if there's enough fans in London that would unite behind the London team, because all the little teams in and around London, they're established. The fans don't like each other very much. The players don't like each other very much, and you've got to try and get all those people outside Greater London as well, not just London, but the home counties, so the southeast, to want to buy into a KHL franchise. I'm not sure how that's going to work. But the GB team, I think that they were warm-up games. They hadn't put their strongest lineup out there. They're working out their combinations there. But yes, they didn't do as well as people predicted against a club team. But you can see the difference between KHL and Elite League straight away. You can see the difference between the KHL and the other European leagues straight away. The KHL is second only to the NHL in quality. There is a significant difference. Look at the Russian team that played at the World Championships. A lot of those players played in the KHL. It's a very skilled league. It's a very fast-paced league. A bit less physical than the NHL, but it's still a top league. They still fight. They still skate hard. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's an interesting one. But hey, the fact that the KHL are looking at London is interesting, because the NFL are looking at putting a team in London. So big, I would say, multinational leagues. The KHL is not just Russia; it's got teams in Kazakhstan, Belarus, China. The KHL is a transcontinental league, and the NHL they're taking games to Europe, and they have played warm up games in the UK before, and exhibition games. The NFL is looking at London as a permanent home for a team. The KHL, I've heard rumours about the KHL looking at London for quite some time, but I think the Elite League, I'm not sure how the Elite League would respond to that. But look, we know Jokerit in Finland have play in the KHL. We know Dynamo Riga in Latvia play in the KHL. I think Minsk, one of the teams in Minsk, play in the KHL. So other nations have got a team in the KHL, and they're normally capital city teams as well. So there is history there. There is a trend there, but I think it'll be very interesting where they're going to have an arena. Outside the O2, I'm not sure where they're going to play games. Would they build a purpose-built arena for it? Would that team have a sister team in the Elite League, for example? Or would another already established team go up to the Elite League to have a London team? Or would they go, right, we're going to have another team from the Elite League go into the KHL and put a London team in the Elite League? It's interesting that it's always London that gets mentioned with these multinational sporting events, with leagues like the NFL and the KHL and the NHL and Major League Baseball. Other cities and towns around the UK could benefit from having an NFL game. You could have it in Glasgow at Hampden. You could have a game at Hampden, for example. You could have a game at Murrayfield, for example, in Edinburgh. The Millennium Stadium in Cardiff for the NFL. It's very interesting. It's always London-centric, and I think that's a problem. Really is. But it's a good point that the KHL are looking at possibly having a team in London, but how successful will that team be, and how many British players will be on that team. Because with Jokerit, Dinamo Riga, and I think the Minsk team, they have a lot of home-based players. Are there enough quality players in the UK who'd be willing to leave their elite league sides and go to a KHL team as well? As there goes a police car past my flat. So that's an interesting one, and a very interesting question, a very interesting debating point, looking at the fact there are already established, admittedly minor league teams, like smaller lower league teams, but there's already established fan bases for teams around London and the southeast. And you've got Guildford Flames, you've got the Bracknell Bees, the Peterborough Phantoms, Milton Keynes Lightning, Basingstoke Bison, all these teams around the southeast of England, outside London, who are well established, historical. They've won national leagues or levels of the national system. It's an interesting one. And how would it work? How many British players would be on this KHL team? How many British players would be willing to relocate from Scotland, Northern Ireland, north of England, and Wales, and go to London to play? Because property prices in London and living in London is expensive. I live just outside London at the moment, and okay, my rent isn't that bad, but food prices around here really expensive. So cost of living. How many players with the wages they'll be paid would be willing to do that? That's an interesting question. It's an interesting point. We don't mention the KHL a lot, but it's an interesting point to raise. And now I'm going to go back to Don Cherry. Don Cherry getting sacked from Hockey Night in Canada. Now, if you're an NHL fan and you've watched any NHL broadcast, be it on the telly, if you're lucky enough to have Premier Sports, Free Sport, there's another police car. Oh, they're very busy tonight. So whether it's on the TV on Free Sports, Premier Sports, or whether it's on the NHL app, or you watch it online, or however you access the NHL, Hockey Night in Canada and Coach's Corner is a staple of viewing. Now Don Cherry, he's like, I don't know how to put it really. He's like the elder statesman of the sport. He's an ex-player, ex-coach. He's been a media personality in Canada for 30 plus years, 40 years since he retired from actual coaching and playing. He used to coach the Boston Bruins back in the day. He's made reference to recent immigrants to Canada not wearing the poppy or understanding what it's about. And there were rumours, as I say, in the summer that he was being let go by Rogers Sportsnet. He was being, moved on, and very quickly they said, no, he's staying put. We have seen over here in the UK, media presenters in sport like Ron Atkinson get fired for racist comments. So this is not a new thing. This is not a brand new thing that happens. But Don Cherry's in his 80s. He's of a certain generation. But yes, that's a big debating point. But the media company he works for went through a major restructuring this summer as well. And some of the other TV talent to do with the NHL broadcasts and other broadcasts they do with other sports they cover were let go. And he was one of those rumoured to be let go. And then they said, no, we're keeping him. And there was some very strongly worded statements saying, no, he's staying. Is he going? Is he staying? Is he going? In the end, I think Sportsnet wished they had sacked him in the summer 3-4 months ago, but he's gone now, and that's creating a debate about what you can and can't say off the record and on the record. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if Coach's Corner continues or is pulled. But we've seen it happen before. Well, you say Nottingham, but then the issue is Rugby League Test Series in Australia. That's going to be really interesting. It's a pity that the GB Lions didn't get a 3-match series against Australia rather than the GB Lions going on New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and Tonga. But I think the Australians losing to Tonga the other week as well has had a big impact on where the NRL are at. And I think the decline of Queensland over the last couple of years and the resurgence of New South Wales, I think the Test side as it currently stands are in flux for Australia. But I think looking at how the the GB team are doing on their tour. I think international rugby league, is going to be very open. I think it's going to be a more open contest between the top teams now. I think the balance of power has shifted to a point where it's more open, and I think anyone can beat anyone. Australia losing to Tonga is a prime example of that. I think New Zealand struggling at the World Cup a couple of years ago. Now the GB Lions, really floundering. I think we are seeing a shift in rugby league internationally. We saw last year the 3-test series, England New Zealand. England won the first two, lost the third test. I think we are seeing a shift in the sport. But England Australia Test series, that's two teams that really don't like each other, and a lot of the English players do play in Australia. So that is a matchup of two teams where the players will know each other really, really well, and the two teams that really don't like each other. There's a lot of needle and niggle in that game, and we shall see what happens. But I do think it would be nice to see a GB series against Australia, which I think we have got next year in the summer. So yeah, there's going to be some interesting battles on the pitch coming up, and we have to look at Wayne Bennett's future as England and GB coach. We really do. I think Wayne Bennett, he's under a lot of pressure because of the way the team have been playing, and the results that have come out of this tour. But we can only wait and see, really. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of international sport happening at the same time. It was a pity that the GB Lions tour was taking place at the same time as the latter stages of the Rugby Union World Cup. I think they could have waited until about now to kick off the tour, but they had to schedule it the way they scheduled it because of the off-season for the NRL and the off-season for the Super League, and allowing players enough rest and recuperation after two grueling, the Super League and NRL season, that's really long. That's some two grueling seasons that these guys play. Give the players some rest and recuperation. But absolutely, the Wayne Bennett question mark about his tenure and how long he's going to remain as England and Great Britain coach is an interesting question mark. Also, question marks over, will he stay at South Sydney long term as well? He is not getting any younger. He's possibly one of the best coaches of all time, but there are question marks over his coaching future at his club and at international level. That is a very interesting point. I wouldn't say the only city and the only arena of decent size would be Nottingham. I would say you would have to look at Belfast, the SSE. But again, the distance from every other KHL team is insane. And I do think the Elite League needs to look at getting a team in London first before anything else, because you've got Cardiff, you've got Belfast, you've had Edinburgh in the past. Obviously, the Edinburgh Capitals, going out of business last year. That if the Elite League wants to grow the game in the south of England, they need to look at London and have a London Elite League team. But the question is, if you're going to have a team in London, in the Elite League, in ice hockey, what arena are you going to use? The O2 at the old Millennium Dome in Greenwich, the O2? Or do you build a purpose-built arena somewhere else in London that's near to transport links in the centre of London or on the inner suburbs? Where do you put it? Because Earls Court's gone now. You've got Wembley. Could you put an ice surface in there? Could you convert that? It's an interesting point to look at. But yeah, the Nottingham Arena is a really good arena. I'm not disputing that in the slightest. It is a very, very good arena, and they're a good solid team. And there's a good fan base of ice hockey in Nottingham. But at the same time, you've got the Nottingham Panthers. Why would you want to take them out of the Elite League when you've got that rivalry with Sheffield? You've got the history there. Why would you want to put them in a brand new league where they're going to have to, I wouldn't say rebuild the team, but they're going to have to look at recruiting other British players from all over the UK and sprinkling some overseas, talent in there are they going to, is that going to work? How is it going to work? I think the KHL want to look at London because that's where a lot of the money is, and that's where a lot of the Russian expats live. It's an interesting point. We'll have to see what happens going forward on that. But there's a lot of things that can and will happen. We shall have to wait and see what actually happens going forward with the KHL and any developments in London. I think it's interesting because it always seems to be London that is the city when a foreign international league looks at hosting games or having a team. They look at London. We've mentioned this before. They look at London first, and that actually annoys a lot of other sports fans and people in this country. Is the investment is London centric, and we're seeing in society in this country a lot of people aren't happy with that London centric thinking. We have some other big urban areas in this country that could use an injection of investment and interest. But yet the KHL looking at London, it's not a new thing. The NFL have been there. Major League Baseball have now taken games to London. Of course, we've got games next year as well. And it's an interesting topic to discuss. We don't discuss the KHL very often on this channel. It's not mentioned as much as it could be. I think the last time I mentioned the KHL was in the Jaromir Jagr video because he played a couple of seasons in the KHL. I think the NFL have signed contracts with Wembley and Tottenham Hotspur to host games at White Hart Lane and Wembley. Obviously, they've used Twickenham with the RFU as well. It's to do with contracts and where they've signed them and the long-term leases that they've got on these stadiums. I think that's generally why. It would be nice to see the NFL games and Major League Baseball games take place in other locations, but they've already signed these contracts for the TV rights, the stadium rental, all that, and that's money, and a lot of the money is in the southeast in London. But I'm living just outside London. I will tell you now, just because there's money in London doesn't mean there's money everywhere across the southeast. My flat is in a converted old house, big old townhouse, Victorian townhouse, and it's got 9 flats in it. The flats aren't amazing. They're all different quality of standard quality. And just because the southeast is wealthier than, let's say, Newcastle or Manchester, doesn't necessarily mean every single person has the money to afford to go either. I think that's a weird one. But I don't understand why the NFL didn't take games to, like, I don't know, Hampden Park in Scotland, for example. You could have had games at the Millennium Principality Stadium in Cardiff. There are opportunities, I think, but they've signed these long-term agreements with the stadiums in London. The London series, they've marketed now as not as the international series, but the international London series. There's a marketing thing there, and yeah, a lot of Americans think Great Britain is London. They tend to forget that there are 60% of the population doesn't live in Greater London and the southeast. They tend to think that we all live in London. And the rest of the country they tend to forget there are some other big cities and towns in this country. But it could be to do with a marketing thing, money thing as well. It's how much they can charge for tickets. You've got to look at Manchester and Newcastle and go, right, Manchester and Newcastle in the north of England are 2 of the wealthier cities in the north of England. I will admit that. But the surrounding areas, the disposable income, London has more disposable income. It's a money thing. It's not necessarily because the stadiums aren't good enough. It is a money thing. But other sports have chosen Manchester and Newcastle to host big events. So Manchester and Newcastle aren't being forgotten. I mean, Rugby League goes to Newcastle a fair bit, and they have the Super League Grand Final in Manchester. So those 2 cities are chosen for other sporting events where they don't have actually teams in the league that's playing there. So, and Newcastle's been, chosen for rugby union as well for the World Cup 4 years ago. So, while the NFL may not go there, other sports have gone there outside the traditional sports that are played in those cities, and it sort of works. They are sports mad cities anyway. You look at the amount of teams in the, especially Greater Manchester. I think they're not far behind Birmingham and Glasgow and Greater London for having a concentration of sports teams in that area. They're sports mad locations. They've got a lot of fan bases of a lot of sports. It is what it is. I mean, they can pack out Old Trafford for the Super League Grand Final, no problem. How many of those people are actually from Manchester? Another thing, but they can pack out Old Trafford for that. St James's Park, they can pack out St James's Park for the Magic weekend. So the NFL needs to look at, okay, this international series. They're chasing it in the UK. They've now been here for 12 years. They've made a lot of money out of the UK in that 12-year time. There are still rumours that they want to move a team here. What team that is, who it's anyone's guess, but there are rumours that they want to put a team actually in London. That has persisted for a long, long time, that they want a London-based team. There were plans for a London-based team before the financial crash. They were planning to have a London-based team by this point. White Hart Lane's been redeveloped. Daniel Levy, the chairman of Tottenham, has signed this lengthy contract to get the NFL playing games there. Wembley and the FA, they make money off the NFL. Long-term contract there. You know, the RFU and Twickenham have made money off the NFL for a couple of years. So, yes, there is definitely a. London seems to have stadiums that are more suitable, that are already prepared for the NFL. But you know, it's an interesting point you raise. Why they haven't gone to Manchester or Newcastle or Birmingham or Glasgow or whatever. I mean, they could go to Murrayfield. They could go Cardiff. There are other locations they could use, but London is a city that the Americans know very well. It's a city that they can sell to a US audience very, very well. And you know, it is what it is. They chose again London for the Major League Baseball, the Olympic Stadium. They wanted to have the Oval. They had actually studied the Oval as one of the venues they wanted to have the Oval in central London, and a few other cricket grounds. But the Cricket World Cup was taking place at that time, and it would have clashed. So they got the London City Stadium. Again, London for these international series. I think the Boston Celtics, London. They play games at, I think, Wembley Arena or the O2, so it's London. Last time the NHL were here, they actually played a game in Belfast. So the NHL notwithstanding, because it's a joint Canadian and US league, most of the Americans, it's always London. They always want to show these big sporting events where they choose location in London, and it is at the detriment of other cities. And it might have something to do with the economic strength of London compared to these other cities, and then the spending power of the fans that are going to go. That's not to say people in Manchester and Newcastle don't have money, because they're two of the wealthier cities in the north of England. But it is what it is. It's money buys things, basically, and they can sell. Newcastle is a harder sell than London. London sells in the US. Newcastle doesn't sell as well in the US. Most Yanks wouldn't know where Newcastle is, for example, even though it's in the northeast. They wouldn't have a clue that Newcastle is a place. Whereas London, they know London, so they can sell it. It's all about how they can market it on TV, and that's another interesting thing. Is talk about changing kickoff times. We're 5 hours ahead of the East Coast, and a lot of the evening games have been moved, so it works out as a 3 o'clock kickoff on the East Coast of the US, but in reality, it's a whatever time kickoff or 1 o'clock kickoff, lunchtime kickoff in the US, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock kickoff here. So midday, 5 o'clock kickoff here. That's why fans in this country are frustrated with kickoff times being changed for the overseas TV market. Right, are there any other questions? Because I've discussed a lot of things and waffled a bit, but there's been a lot happening at the moment. And if you want some NHL kind of questions, I'm going to do some videos on the San Jose Sharks and Minnesota Wild, and I think the Ottawa Senators as well, and how bad their starts to the season have been. I mean, the Senators' start to the season is absolutely atrocious. the San Jose Sharks. I mean, last year with Erik Karlsson, do I think Saracens? Now, this is something that is really interesting. Really interesting. They haven't been stripped of any of the titles they have won whilst in breach of the salary cap in the last 3 years, which I find really, really interesting. That they haven't been stripped of titles, which has happened in the NRL, for example, in rugby league in Australia. But the points deduction is massive. I think it's minus 35 points or something. The fine is about, I think it's 3.5 million or 5.5 million. So the fine, the points deduction are massive, and for rugby union, that is a big thing. Big thing. There's less money in rugby union than in football and other sports around and other leagues around the world. Look, they've got the players to get out of the situation, but a lot of their players have just been to the World Cup for 6 weeks and will be carrying knocks, carrying injuries. They'll be tired. They're going to need some rest and recuperation. So their best players aren't necessarily going to be fighting fitness to get them out of the situation until at least December, maybe end of November. It's possible. It is very, very possible. I'm very surprised, though, that they didn't get stripped of their titles that they won and those titles given to the runners-up of those games that were played, be it in Europe or domestically. So Exeter, for example, would be a team that would have inherited a Premiership title. In Europe, there'd be several teams that would have inherited, European Cup titles. It is a shame that it's come to this, but there was some iffy dealings with players, and it was in the press. It's been in the press a lot. This has been rumbling on for quite some time. This isn't just like last season. This is a long-term way around the salary cap by using third-party payments and business ventures to pay players. This is a long-standing issue that's been going on for quite some time. If they are to get relegated, the teams above them have got to play out their skins, because Saracens are the best team in the country. Exeter aren't far behind, but if you look at it, Saracens are the best team in the country. But if they get relegated, it's because management decided with high-profile players that have just been at the World Cup as well to fiddle the salary cap. And we've seen this with the Melbourne Storm, for example, in the rugby league in Australia, and the second part, the hidden payments to some high-profile players like Cameron Smith and Billy Slater that have damaged their reputations. Now, there are some high-profile players, including Owen Farrell and the Vunipola brothers, who have benefited financially from these third-party payments via property investments. Saracens are arguing that they haven't done anything wrong necessarily, but other teams have complied with the rules and haven't done this. It doesn't help that Saracens have been the most successful team in that period that they're being investigated, that they were investigated for. But the points deduction is massive. It does put them on a massive back foot. I think they've got to win 90% of their games or something with bonus points to stand a really good chance of not getting involved in a relegation scrap. But there is a massive chance they could get relegated. This could either galvanise the team and the squad, or dishearten the team and the squad and the club. But the salary cap breach, it's a long-standing thing. This is not something that's only happened last year. This has been going on for a while. This investigation's been going on a while. It became public knowledge, I believe, at the beginning of the summer. I read an article about it online, and I saw a couple of newspaper articles and a couple of news reports on it. So it came to public knowledge, at least as far as I'm aware, in the mainstream media 6-7 months ago. So in the warm up to the World Cup, just after the Six Nations, I think it started to filter out into the news outlets that Saracens were in a bit of trouble. But they have waited until the World Cup has finished and the players have come back, and now they've hit them with this massive points deduction. I'm surprised they weren't stripped of the points they'd already acquired this season as well, to make it an actual minus 35 rather than they've already won some games, got some bonus points, and in reality. So I'm very, very surprised they weren't stripped back to 0 and then given minus 35. And I'm also surprised that they weren't stripped of their titles that they've won in this period, that they've been breaching the salary cap. It shows that the salary cap system works when you can actually catch out the salary cap cheaters. It does show it works, but it also shows how easy it is for the system to be abused as well. Very similar to the Melbourne Storm. I'm referring to the Melbourne Storm here. It's a very similar salary cap breach to the Melbourne Storm and how they did it with third-party payments to players who were fully aware that they were getting a second contract, basically. This is where, salary cap working, but also failing in the process of working. They've caught them out in the end, but it took 3 or 4 years of them getting away with it for the system to catch up and punish them. Will this punishment act as a deterrent? Quite possibly. I think it quite possibly could act as the deterrent needed to stop it happening again. However, how many other clubs have fiddled the salary cap in some way in the same period of time, but because it's Saracens and they've been caught and made the scapegoats, that these other clubs have decided, either to stop doing it or they've got away with it this time. I think we'll see what happens. Saracens are going to appeal, no doubt. They've said they've done nothing wrong, so we'll assume there's an appeal going to happen. But at the same time, a precedent's been set going forward, and we'll see if they can play their way out of it. That is a massive, massive hole they're in. I think they're currently on, minus 20-something points. Minus 25 points, I think. The nearest team above them, I think, has got 6 or 7 points already. So they're about 31 points behind the next team above them. It's going to be a hard ask. I think they probably have the players to survive and get just enough points to avoid relegation. But at the same time, it does increase the likelihood of them getting relegated. So it depends how many points the teams above them drop. Depends how many bonus points the team above them get in losses as well. I think bonus points could prove very crucial. And it's also the fact that it's not just it's not every player, it's key leadership figures who've been implicated in the playing squad that have also been implicated in the salary cap breach with, I think, Owen Farrell and the Vunipola brothers have been implicated as some of the players that benefited from the scheme that they had going. But that's a very interesting question and an interesting topic that, we'll rumble on. And don't be surprised if Saracens decide to appeal this. But I think the punishment's been handed down. They're saying that they're maintaining their innocence, but we'll see what happens. We'll absolutely see what happens for the rest of the season. But it I think, has sent shockwaves through the rugby union world. We've seen salary cap breaches in rugby league on a regular, frequent basis since the salary cap was introduced. I will refer to the Melbourne Storm as the best example of a salary cap breach that is of a similar scale to this. Other sports have salary caps as well. There is an argument to have that in football, a salary cap or a spending cap of some kind to control, costs. But I think the player wages that we see in the Premier League now with football are at a point where I don't think players would be willing to take a pay cut or a pay freeze to allow a salary cap to be brought into place. Who is this? Someone is messaging me. But no, it's an interesting topic. It's an interesting question. Does that mean other leagues in rugby union, do they look at the Saracens case and then start looking at their own clubs and their own books and going, are you breaching a salary cap? So that could actually have wider implications going forward as well. But we'll see what happens, and we'll see if they can play their way out of trouble. But the blame rests with management taking the decision to do what they did. But no, it's a very valid question. Talking about salary caps, the NHL salary cap being lower. Look at the problems that caused with signing players. The NFL's got a salary cap. The NBA's got a salary cap. I think Major League Baseball has a salary cap or some kind of spending cap. I'm not sure on that one. But there are salary caps in lots of other sports, and they work pretty effectively. If I'm honest, some more effectively than others. But we've seen some pretty high-profile salary cap breaches as well. So it's all very interesting. But yeah, there's a lot to discuss with salary cap breaches, and are salary caps the way to go forward as well in professional sport, or is it allow market forces like football has to work their magic? But yeah, no, we've definitely seen salary caps be an issue of contention when it comes to getting players signed and contract negotiations and how much, how long do you like the contract pay and that sort of thing. And I'm trying so hard not to be annoyed by whoever's messaging me. But it is what it is. I mean, very good question. Are there any other questions to ask? Because I do think the salary cap breach at Saracens is a video in itself. But we're not having all the details to hand. It would be wrong of me to start, oh God, bloody phone. I think the Saracen situation is it does raise questions about the integrity of the salary cap system that the RFU has is in place as well. It does raise questions about the financial stability of rugby union, and there's been a lot of questions about rugby union finances in the build up to the World Cup with the proposed changes to the international calendar as well, and the Sunwolves being taken out of Super Rugby, and the various Super Rugby franchises struggling financially. Financing rugby union is a big thing, and rugby league. Both codes are struggling financially. A lot of clubs in both codes are running just about break even. Some of them at a push. Very few make a profit. Saracens being one of those that did make a profit. Others running at a loss. So the money in the club game and in the international game in both codes of rugby is another debating point that we've had for months, if not a year or so on this channel. We've been debating finances of rugby union and rugby league and how precarious they actually are. They're not in as healthy a state as the governing bodies would like. And players want to get paid. The more exposure and the more TV rights these sports, they get, the more they want to get paid. And unfortunately, only a handful of clubs can afford to pay these players the money. And this is where the Sonny Bill Williams code switch from union to league to the Toronto Wolfpack is raising questions about the salary cap in the Super League, and are Toronto getting favourable treatment, under the salary cap system, because he signed some big money contract with the Toronto Wolfpack, and that is raising questions about the integrity of having a system like that in place. But it's a good question though with the Saracens one. Yeah, very good question. And the fact that, a lot of their core leadership group have been at the World Cup with England and are implicated in the scandal as well is raising a few questions about the integrity of the sport and of the players, which is not what you want. But if you want any kind of comparison to a salary cap breach, look at the Melbourne Storm breach of 2009, I believe, 2010. That's, I think, the best example I can give of another similar salary cap breach in a league that had one and a sport that had one that had similar implications as well with what was discovered and the length of how they were, fooling the system, is the best way I can describe that in a nutshell. Any more questions? Because the Saracens question was really good, because there are topics that I know you guys want to talk about while I'm still online. I'm happy to take a few more questions, and I'll try and answer them as quickly as I can, because I've got friends coming around in a bit, and things to do in the flat. So it'd be interesting to see what other questions you come up with in the next couple of minutes, because we have discussed some really interesting stuff. I'm surprised the KHL, for example, came up as a question with them looking at possibly going and having a team in London. That would be interesting. I'm not sure how successful and how many fans would want to watch that, considering that we don't have a London elite league team yet, let alone a London team at the lower levels which has London in the name. So that'd be interesting. But yeah, having a KHL interest, we could see a international series game. Would the NHL be interested in coming to the UK as well? They're looking at other, they've gone to Scandinavia, they've gone to the Czech Republic. Would they be interested in coming here? They've gone to Switzerland, of course, as well. So would be interested in the NHL bringing games back to the UK? That could be an interesting debating point. But no. So any more questions? Because otherwise, I'll wind this down and get it uploaded to the channel in full. Any more questions on to do with any topic to do with sport, any topic at all? We've covered a fair bit in the 2 hours that we've been online, oh God, is the weather that bad? Yes, the weather is that bad outside. Great, but no, I have to admit that the questions that have been asked and the things we've talked about, really interesting stuff. I have missed doing this as well. A few of you have sent comments in saying, "Am I okay?" and stuff. Moving was stressful. I've had some health issues that have been stressful, and I've had a relationship breakdown, which has been pretty stressful as well. But we're still here. And I was asked, do I think I'll reach 1,000 subscribers by Christmas? It's doable. We're nearly at 700, so it is absolutely doable to hit 1,000 subscribers by Christmas. It's just getting the content back up and rolling and discussing, some really interesting and important sports topics that are occurring. And there's a couple of video ideas I've got rattling around in my head. I mean, Sam Burgess is now retired from rugby league. Dylan Hartley's retired from rugby union. So there's a couple of high-profile British sports stars that have recently retired from their chosen sport, and we've discussed, the issues with Arsenal and Tottenham and the rise of Leicester and Liverpool being at the top of the league, and Man City, starting to look human and vulnerable. I don't think Man City can win 3 titles in a row. I think they peaked with their record-breaking season. They were pegged back by Liverpool. They went toe to toe last season, and Man City just had enough to win last season. I think this season, I think it might be a season too far for 3 in a row, but you never know. But they are sitting 4th at the moment in the league, so their defence is letting them down on the goal difference there. So that's an interesting one. Man United, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, worst start in I think 30 odd years. I mean, Man United have declined as a team. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has lost as many games as Jurgen Klopp has in 1 year as Jurgen Klopp has in 4. So you can see the difference between Liverpool and Man United at the moment in quality and confidence. And that's something that hasn't been a thing for 30 years, with Liverpool being above Man United in the league regularly. That's a thing that hasn't happened for a long time. So Man United have gone backwards. Liverpool have gone forwards. Roles have been reversed, which when I was a young lad, Liverpool were the top team and Man United were coming through, and now roles have been reversed. Liverpool have come through and looking likely to win the league this season, and Man United are declining. But it's going to be interesting to see which manager is the first manager sacked this season. It's going to be interesting to see, transfers in January, who splashes the cash. And of course, Newcastle United, will Mike Ashley ever sell that football club? Because that's been an ongoing thing for 2.5 years now, that the club's been up for sale. It's still ongoing. There's a lot of things happening behind the scenes as well with that football club. So that's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. But for now, I think I'm going to call that a wrap. We've been going for 2 hours. So I'm going to call that a wrap. Thank you very much for taking part, watching, and asking the questions. And I will have more videos up for you very, very soon. And for now, goodbye.